Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Sign the papers, or watch the snow bury everything you love. The voice was not merely deep. It was a tectonic rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of the penthouse, shaking the very marrow of Julian's bones. There was no warmth in the sprawling, glass-walled office of Drax Industries, despite the thermostat being set to a comfortable 72 degrees. Julian Vane, shivering in a threadbare coat that had seen too many winters, stared at the black fountain pen resting on the mahogany desk. It looked less like a writing instrument and more like a weapon. Across from him sat the predator, Drax, the alpha, the man whose silhouette dominated the city skyline, and whose face dominated Julian's nightmares for 6 agonizing years. Cashin didn't look up from his tablet, his indifference sharper than a blade. He was a sculpture of indifference and malice, carved from ice and old money. Julian's fingers trembled as he reached for the pen. He wasn't signing away a business deal. He was signing an indenture. A contract of servitude in exchange for the medical bills that were currently crushing the life out of his daughter. Julian hesitated, the tip of the pen hovering over the paper. Hesitation is a luxury for those with options, Mr. Vane, Cashin said, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, dark and turbulent. And looking at your credit report, you ran out of options 3 months ago. Julian swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He signed. He had to. For Lily. The descent into hell had begun with a wish. 3 weeks earlier, the Seoul winter had been particularly unforgiving. The frost didn't just coat the windows of Julian's basement apartment. It seemed to creep inside, curling around the meager furniture like a parasite. Julian, once a promising scholarship student at the conservatory, was now reduced to scrubbing floors and taking odd jobs, his Omega status a brand that closed more doors than it opened in a city obsessed with lineage. Lily, his 5-year-old daughter, was the only source of light in his monochromatic world. She was small for her age, fragile as a porcelain doll, with a persistent cough that rattled in her chest like loose change. "Papa," Lily had whispered one evening, huddled under 3 blankets. "Is Santa real?" Julian had looked up from the pile of past-due notices, his heart fracturing. "Of course he is, Petal." "What?" "Because I wrote him a letter," she said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from under her pillow. "The kids at school said Santa lives in the North Pole, but I saw the big tower downtown. The one that touches the clouds. The lights are gold on top. That looks like a castle. I think he lives there. The Drax Tower. The headquarters of the conglomerate that owned half the city's infrastructure. I mailed it today." Lily beamed, her cheeks flushed with fever. "I put it in the big blue box." Julian had smiled, masking the terror. A letter to the Drax Corporation would be shredded by interns before it ever reached the mailroom floor. It was a harmless fantasy. He was wrong. The letter had not been shredded. Through a bureaucratic anomaly, or perhaps the cruel twist of fate, the envelope, addressed simply to the king of the castle in crayon, had bypassed the sorting machines. It had been placed in a pile of public relations curiosities intended for the trash, but Drax, bored during a merger meeting, had picked it up. He read it. "Dear Santa King, my papa is sad. He cries when he thinks I am sleeping. The heaters don't work and he is cold. I don't want toys. I just want my papa to smile again. And maybe medicine for my chest. Please help. Love, Lily." Cashin was a man who crushed competitors for sport. He was an alpha of the highest order, dominant, territorial, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. Yet, the rawness of the plea struck a chord in the hollow cavity of his chest. It wasn't pity. Cashin didn't do pity. It was curiosity. Who in this city was so destitute they thought the CEO of a defense contractor was Saint Nick? He had his head of security run a trace on the return address. When the file landed on his desk, Julian Vane, unregistered Omega, debt-ridden, single father, Cashin saw an opportunity. He needed a live-in housekeeper for his penthouse, someone discreet who wouldn't sell his secrets to the tabloids. Someone desperate enough to endure his temper. He summoned Julian. Now, standing in the penthouse that felt more like a mausoleum than a home, Julian tried to make himself invisible. He had been working for Cashin for 2 weeks. "The coffee is cold," Cashin's voice cut through the silence of the morning. Julian froze, the silver tray in his hands trembling slightly. I apologize, sir. I'll brew a fresh pot. Don't bother. Cashin stood up from the breakfast table, his sheer size sucking the air out of the room. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Julian's lifetime earnings. He walked over to Julian, invading his personal space, inhaling deeply. Julian held his breath. He wore scent blockers, heavy-duty patches he bought on the black market, to hide his omega pheromones. He couldn't risk Cashin smelling him. If Cashin smelled him, really smelled him, the game would be over. 6 years ago, at a masquerade gala Julian had catered, he had gone into an unexpected, violent heat. A masked alpha had found him in the wine cellar. It was a blur of instinct, pheromones, and desperate need. They never exchanged names. Julian had fled before dawn, terrified of the consequences. He knew the alpha was powerful. He didn't know it was Cashin Drax until he saw the man's eyes on a magazine cover months later. By then, Julian was pregnant, alone, and terrified of the Drax reputation. The Drax family was notorious for taking illegitimate heirs and discarding the Omega parents. So, Julian had run. He had hidden. You smell like chemicals, Cashin murmured, leaning down, his nose grazing Julian's neck. It's offensive. I have a skin condition, sir, Julian lied, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The ointments have a strong odor. Cashin pulled back, a flicker of suspicion in his gaze. Ensure the library is organized by noon. And vain. Yes, sir. Stop shaking. It makes you look guilty. The days bled into weeks. The dynamic was suffocating. Cashin was a tyrant, demanding perfection, criticizing every flaw, yet strangely attentive. He would leave cash on the counter for groceries that far exceeded the cost of food, silently ensuring Julian could buy better winter clothes. He ordered the best pediatric specialist to consult on his employee's healthcare plan, inadvertently treating Lily without ever meeting her. Julian felt the wall around his heart crumbling. He saw the loneliness in Cashin, the way the alpha stared out at the city lights, holding a glass of scotch like it was a lifeline. Cashin wasn't just a monster. He was a man haunting his own life. But the secret festered. Lily was the image of her father. She had Cashin's eyes, that distinctive, storm cloud gray. The inevitable collision course began on Christmas Eve. A blizzard had shut down the city. The schools closed early. Julian's neighbor, who usually watched Lily, was stranded across town. Julian had no choice. He had to bring Lily to the penthouse. He planned to hide her in the servants' quarters, praying Cashin would stay late at the office. But Cashin came home early. Julian was in the kitchen, frantically trying to prepare a holiday roast, when he heard the front door slam. The heavy thud of footsteps followed. Vain. Why is the foyer lights not? Cashin stopped. Julian rushed out, wiping his hands on his apron, panic seizing his throat. Sir, I can explain, the storm. Cashin wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the small figure sitting on the rug in the living room, coloring in a book. Lily looked up. She didn't look scared. She looked at the towering man in the black coat, her eyes widening. Are you the king? She asked, her voice clear and bell-like. Cashin stood frozen. He dropped his briefcase. The sound was deafening in the silence. He walked slowly toward the child, his movements predatory, focused. Lily, come here, Julian whispered, stepping between them. Sir, this is my daughter. I had nowhere else to take her. I'll leave immediately. Please, just deduct it from my pay. Cashin ignored him. He sidestepped Julian with fluid grace and knelt on one knee before the girl. He stared at her face. He saw the shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw, and those eyes. His eyes. Then he inhaled. The scent blockers on Julian were fading after a long day of sweat and labor. And Lily didn't wear blockers. She smelled like milk and honey, but underneath that, she smelled of alpha lineage. She smelled of Drax. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with static. Cashin slowly stood up. When he turned to Julian, the indifference was gone. In its place was a rage so cold it burned. How old is she? Cashin asked. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. 5, Julian breathed, backing away until his back hit the wall. 5, Cashin repeated. He did the math. The gala. The wine cellar. The missing Omega he had searched for months, before his father told him to stop chasing ghosts. You. Cashin stepped forward, crowding Julian against the plaster. You are the one from the cellar. Cashin, please. Don't say my name. Cashin roared, punching the wall beside Julian's head. The plaster cracked. You stole my child. You hid her in poverty while I sat in this tower, rotting. I protected her. Julian screamed back, the dam breaking. Tears streamed down his face. Your mother came to me. The day after the gala. She knew. She told me if I ever approached you, if I ever claimed the child was yours, she would have me destroyed. She said a stray dog doesn't get to sit at the table just because it stole a scrap. Cashin froze. The rage wavered, replaced by a dawn of horror. My mother? She threatened to have me institutionalized. Julian sobbed, sliding down the wall. I didn't run from you, Cashin. I ran for you. I didn't want you to be forced into a scandal. I just wanted my baby to be safe. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the howling wind outside and Lily's quiet gasp. Cashin looked at the trembling Omega on the floor, the man he had treated as a servant, the man who had been raising his heir in a freezing basement. He looked at Lily, who was watching him with fearful awe. The alpha in him, the part that demanded control, shattered. In its place, the instinct to protect roared to life. He knelt, not to intimidate, but to level himself with Julian. He reached out, his hand shaking, and brushed a tear from Julian's cheek. She lied to you, Cashin said, his voice cracking. My mother. She lied. I looked for you. For a year, I looked for you. I didn't care about the scandal. That night. It was the only time I felt real. Julian looked up, eyes wide. You looked. I never stopped, Cashin admitted. He turned to look at Lily. She thinks I'm Santa? She thinks you're the king who can fix hearts, Julian whispered. Cashin closed his eyes, a single tear escaping. I haven't fixed anything. I've only broken things. He stood up and walked over to Lily. He held out a hand, large and scarred. I'm not Santa, little one, but I am the man who owns this tower. And I'm the man who is going to make sure you never feel cold again. Lily hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. The reconciliation was not a straight line. It was a winding road through a minefield of past traumas. That night, the blizzard trapped them in the penthouse. For the first time, the servant quarters were empty. Cashin insisted they stay in the master suite, not for sex, but for safety. He built a nest of pillows and duvets in the center of the massive bed, driven by an alpha instinct to surround his newfound pack. Julian watched warily as the billionaire CEO made hot chocolate, looking utterly out of his element, but determined. The medical bills, Cashin said, sitting on the edge of the bed while Lily slept between them. They are gone. I bought the hospital's debt portfolio an hour ago. Cashin, you can't just buy hospitals because you're guilty, Julian said softly. Watch me. Cashin growled, though there was no heat in it. He looked at Julian, his gaze intense. Why didn't you come to me? Even with the threats. Because I saw you on the news, Julian admitted. You looked so cold. So ruthless. I thought you would take her and throw me away. I am ruthless, Cashin agreed. He reached out, taking Julian's hand. The skin was rough from years of scrubbing floors. Cashin raised it to his lips, kissing the knuckles reverently. But you are the only one who has ever seen me defenseless. You own me, Julian. You have since that night in the cellar. The power dynamic shifted. It wasn't master and servant anymore. It was two fractured souls trying to fuse back together. But the world outside the tower was still waiting. The matriarch, Cashin's mother, would find out. 2 days after Christmas, she did. Eleanor Drax stormed into the penthouse unannounced, flanked by lawyers. She found Julian in the kitchen and sneered. I see the rat has found its way back into the pantry. Julian went pale, dropping a glass. It shattered. Before Eleanor could speak another word, a shadow fell over her. Cashin stood in the doorway. He didn't look like the dutiful son anymore. He looked like a warlord. Get out, Cashin said quietly. Cashin, be reasonable. Eleanor scoffed, gesturing to Julian. This creature is a liability. We can pay him off, take the child and... I said. Cashin stepped forward, his voice dropping an octave, the alpha command vibrating the air. Get out. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The sheer force of his presence was suffocating. You threatened him. You kept my mate and my child in squalor for 6 years. If you ever step foot in this building or near my family again, I will dismantle your assets piece by piece until you are begging on the street corner." Eleanor paled. She had created a monster to rule the business world, never expecting him to turn his teeth on her. She turned and fled. Cashin turned to Julian, who was trembling amidst the broken glass. Cashin didn't care about the mess. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled Julian into his arms, burying his face in Julian's scent gland. "It's over," Cashin murmured into his neck. "No one touches you. No one hurts you. You are mine." Julian gripped Cashin's lapels, finally letting go of 6 years of fear. "And you're ours? Always." Months later, the snow had melted. Julian sat in the private garden of the penthouse, now renovated to include a playground. He was no longer the servant. He was the partner of the most powerful man in the city. The ring on his finger was heavy, a promise made of diamonds and platinum. Lily was pushing Cashin on the swing set, laughing as the formidable CEO of Drax Industries feigned weakness, letting a 5-year-old push him around. Cashin caught Julian's eye across the garden. The look was intense, possessive, and filled with a heat that promised a very long night once Lily was asleep. The darkness in Cashin hadn't disappeared. He was still possessive, still dangerous to his enemies. But for Julian, he had become a shield. Julian smiled, touching his stomach. The morning sickness had started yesterday. Lily was going to be a big sister. He had walked into the lion's den to save his daughter, expecting to be devoured. Instead, he had found that the lion was just lonely, waiting for the only tamer who knew his true name. And that is how the struggling Omega tamed the king of the city. If you enjoyed seeing Cashin destroy his own mother to protect his family, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a partner who left you in poverty because of a misunderstanding, or is 6 years too long to wait for the truth? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Tall, broad shoulders, wearing expensive charcoal suit, dark hair, sharp gray eyes, intense expression, protective pose, alpha aura. Man 2. Slightly shorter, slimmer build, wearing soft, oversized sweater, messy brown hair, gentle expression, blushing. Omega. Child, small girl, 5 years old, holding a teddy bear, standing between them. Background is a luxurious penthouse living room at night with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a snowy city skyline. Fireplace glowing warm light, cinematic lighting, sentimental atmosphere, intricate details.